And we are back from lunch. Madam Clerk, item number 14.
Item number 14 is from the Administrative Office to review the draft report from the California Natural Resources Agency on the potential designation of parts of the Mokelumne River as wild and scenic, and provide any direction to county staff on the county's response to the report.
So the Administrative Office is bringing this item to provide some discussion and possible response to the recent report from California Natural Resources Agency. It comes from requirements laid forth in AB 142, and what it basically required, the Assembly bill, was that California Natural Resources Agency commission a study on the Mokelumne River, and part of that would be to identify and provide recommendations on designating certain sections of the river as wild and scenic. The report came out in January, and what the basically provided stakeholder comment periods that ends tomorrow. This would be our last, the reason it was coming today is this is our last opportunity if the county wishes to provide any comments to the report. Now we can provide comments as if the board approves something that goes over, or we can remain silent on the board on any comments. Certainly a number of stakeholders in the community are providing their own comments, including CCWD, who I knew was going to be coming today to be able to provide some comments. What the study itself is rather lengthy. It's over 200 pages. A lot of information, certainly. What it boils down to, though, is recommending between 4 possible alternatives. One is recommending that none of the 5 study segments of the North Fork Mokelumne River and Mokelumne River under consideration for designated be included in the California Wild and Scenic River System. Alternative 2 is to include only a subset of the 5 eligible segments of the North Fork Mokelumne River under consideration. The third is to include all eligible segments of the North Fork Mokelumne and Mokelumne River in the Wild and Scenic System. Each of the segments considered for designation has been found to be eligible. And then alternative 4, which like 3, is to include all 5 eligible river segments. However, it also has special provisions that ensure the suitability of the designation. Local land and water uses generally would be maintained. Particular special provisions are included as part of the designation to ensure water users can continue to use existing or comparable infrastructure to access water available under existing water rights, and then potentially develop future water rights and projects that do not adversely affect the free-flowing condition, natural character, and extraordinary scenic and or recreation values for which those segments are designated. I can list off what the segments are if the board would like. Otherwise, that was the... Okay.
No, I attended the public workshop in Mokel, as well as several meetings, including the UMRA meeting on this. I feel well briefed, and I read the report.
Supervisor Clapp, no?
Well, that really concludes then the intro to this piece. I felt, given that certainly the community and board members would have comments, what I'll do is try and take notes on kind of a general direction, and if we do want to authorize a statement, we'll get that drafted up today to be issued tomorrow.
One thing is my understanding, I did speak with Joel Metzger, Information Officer for CCWD. We had a lengthy conversation last night, and Joel had told me last night that the time period has been extended to March 8th. Yes. Is that correct? So it is not tomorrow, it is March 8th.
Well, that is good news. That means
that you have
we'll have a little more
time.
breathing time. I appreciate knowing that.
So, is there any board comments at this time? Supervisor Oliveira, your light is on.
Mr. Chair, I have to disclose I also had a conversation with Mr. Metzger regarding this issue prior to the meeting.
Okay. Supervisor Mills?
And I would like to disclose that we tried to have a conversation prior to the meeting.
Sounds
and
like,
weren't able to do so. But I did have a conversation with Supervisor Carl Rotifer from Tuolumne County on this matter. And I would like to hear CCWD's input in this and public comment before making further comments myself.
Mr. Chair, I didn't know we had to disclose it, but since everybody else has, I've spoken to Joel as well.
Joel, you were lobbying, it sounds like. Same here. So we all disclosed. He spoke to all 5 of us. Okay. Is there any other board comments before we can get? No? We will have public comments at this time, and I'm going to allow CCWD some time up here and treat them like staff, since they are an agency here in the county. So if they want to put their presentation forward now or wait till after public comments, and maybe you can answer some of the public comment questions that may come up during public comment. So,
yeah, whatever the pleasure of the board is, I can go
so
with that.
we'll open for public comments, and then if you can write down any questions, answer to any questions that may come up. So.
Great, because I got to go. Marty Crane, Rancho. We were at the town hall meeting as well, and I would encourage you, if you have an opportunity, it was filmed, to review that and read all the comments, because it was very well attended. And sadly, unless you do that, you won't get to hear us sing. We were on it anyway. So we sang a song for the river. But thank you for addressing this, and good luck. Thank you.
Ben Stopper, District 5. I spoke on this issue before. It's very important that we look towards the future as we go through this. I mean, while wild and scenic seems inevitable to me that it's going to happen. It's, you know, it's the final comment that Mr. Lutz made with the provisions and stated, so that we can drop our drinking straw into there to be able to access our water in the future, that we should really think about taking a look at, in my personal opinion. And from my personal opinion, even though I work with these gentlemen, from where I stand, these guys have put in a lot of good time. They have a lot of good points. So please listen clearly to them, because they know what they're talking about, and they have had, you know, a lot of time with the state to help get these provisions instated. So thank you for your time, and you all have a wonderful day.
Any other public comments?
Al Scallon, Taxpayer Association. We previously opposed this, and we do again. We had our director, Anthony Wooster, attend and represent us at the meeting, and she reiterated our opposition to wild and scenic. And so I'd like to yield my time to Joel.
Cliff Edson, San Andreas. I oppose wild and scenic. It affects property rights. If people want to affect a person's property, they should purchase it from them, not take it from them. And that's what this does. Now, I don't see how this river can even qualify actually anyhow, considering it has so many diversions, dams, and there are some things that are now there that weren't there a few years back, like salmon beds and things like that. Through UMRA, one of the funding sources that UMRA has is getting grants from different places, and one of the top priorities a couple of years ago was to plant salmon and salmon beds in the river. When you do that, it makes it closer to wild and scenic, and but it's not there. It wasn't there. So I would like to save the river, actually, because I think that the river is an asset to our county. I think in our future, it's our future water, but it does no good if you can't get to it. Now, from what I read, they'll say that, oh yeah, you can get to your water, we're not going to give up your water rights. Try to get a permit for it at that point. You know, a lot of people don't see this if they haven't been around a while. They hear Wild and Scenic, and it's a beautiful name. It sounds really good. It sounds very, very natural and nature-like. And the river is gorgeous. There's no doubt about it. But I believe that we can save it if we were to partner up with Amador County and put something, you know, whatever they're afraid of happening to that river. I think we can do it as two counties working together to protect it. We don't need another layer of non-government management. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Vicki Reinke, and I am speaking on behalf of the Calaveras Republican Party. Wild and Scenic River designation is something that we are opposed to, and the reason why is because it takes the property or the water rights away from the future residents of Calaveras County and our state. One of the things that we have to remember is what is a Wild and Scenic River designation. And I agree with Cliff, we have a beautiful river. We've had it for ever and ever, and nothing's ever been harmfully done to it. And I'll get to that in a minute, but the river segments with these attributes are designated as wild, scenic, and recreational based on level of watershed development. New dams are prohibited on river segments covered under the Act. That's the piece in there that is very troubling to us as a Republican group. One of the things that I think Cliff sort of mentioned, but if you think back 150 years ago, had we designated the river wild and scenic, we would have no dams on that river today. What would that river look like? Probably dry up in the years of drought. So again, we already have the upper lakes that feed down into the PG&E. We have Pardee. We have, let's see, there's one other one. But anyway, those lakes, if they weren't on this river right now, we wouldn't have the water we need for the people of the state of California. That's what's most important. These wild and scenic designations are really an environmental designation, and what they do is they take water rights away from the people. The property that adjacent to these scenic rivers are restricted. So anyway, we understand that this study was done based on AB 142. We supported it at first, and then we took our support away when it became a designated wild and scenic temporarily. So we don't want to see that happen to this river. I hope that you guys will all study that part of it and be opposed to designating it a wild and scenic. And that's what I have to say about that. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Elaine St. John, and I am from District 4. I am also against the wild and scenic designation. Carl Rutherford, who is Supervisor to Tuolumne County, came here in March of 2015, March the 18th, and actually Supervisor Oliveira heard him. Ex-Supervisor Edson also heard him. What he spoke about was the unintended consequences of special designation. And I'm going to quote what he said. I talked to him on Sunday, by the way, and he reconfirmed this as well. He said that the rimfire broke out in the Clavey Canyon. The Clavey River feeds under the Tuolumne Wild and Scenic. And although the Clavey was not wild and scenic, the U.S. Forest Service policy treats any tributary into a wild scenic with the same actions that are pertinent to wild and scenic. That included not dropping fire retardant on the river in the canyon of the Clavey. When the fire was small and manageable, the fire escaped. So that's an unintended consequence. And you know, when you look at something like this and you're doing research, you're going to do research and you're going to say to yourself, okay, here's the facts I've gathered, and what's the end game? And I'm wondering what's the end game. Because as we've said, hey, wild and scenic sounds really great. We're all in favor of having fish and beautiful things like that. But I believe that the end game is probably to get rid of the dams. So I want you to know that in 2015, the largest dam was taken away from the state of California, and that was the San Clemente in Carmel Valley. And also there are now 4 dams along the Klamath that they're thinking about taking away too. That's a wild and scenic river. So I'm not talking about whether or not it's a state wild and scenic or a federal wild and scenic. I'm just saying that, you know, you give away these rights from you protecting something that's valuable to us, our water rights. I want you to also know that there is a bill called 2975 that was written by a person that is in the Assembly. She was in the 7 years of the Board of Directors for the Metropolitan Water of Southern California. And what this bill basically does is if the feds decide to restate a wild and scenic and take that away from the state of California, that California would be able to step in. So you got to wonder, why are they doing that? Are they afraid that, you know, maybe Trump is going to take some of those designations away? And this is from a person from Southern California that wrote this bill. So I think it's important for you to look at AB 2975. I do have copies of that bill, and I hope you go against the wild and scenic.
Any other public comments?
Bonnie Newman from Double Springs. I look at it like this. Somehow this planet was created by virtue of God or nature or a conglomeration of God and nature, and planet has been able to sustain itself for hundreds of thousands of years with virtually the changes provided by natural occurrences. And I look at what man does as being counter to what God and nature has created, almost doing the devil's work. A dam is not a lake. A dam is man-created. And clear cutting is not the same as selective harvesting. So what we do to benefit man is contrary to what I think the natural progression of things are. When man decides to modify the earth in whatever way, by building a dam or grading a hillside or putting in roads or changing the natural terrain of the world, I think we're doing a great injustice to the future. We're worried about water rights and resources. There has always been enough resources. What the change has been is there's too many people. Overpopulation is the problem. Overpopulation is almost the problem of every issue that we encounter, because laws are made because we're too close together and we infringe on other people's rights. Until we address the core of what our problems are, is there's too many people, too few resources. We're always going to be trying to catch up or make amends for. I think what we need to do is step back, monitor the development that man decides to do, try to salvage what God and nature has created so that there is something in the future for people to make decisions about. Because once something's gone, it's gone. And to salvage something, to retain something, is to hold it in trust for the future. We need to be stewards of our planet. Thank you.
Any other public comments? No? Seeing none, CCWD, if you would like to speak, I'll allow you 5 minutes to speak.
All right. Thank you, Chair Tofinelli and board members. My name is Peter Martin. I'm the Water Resources Manager for Calaveras County Water District. Today I'm just going to kind of speak specifically to the study, the draft study, I should say, and Joel can kind of add a little bit about kind of where we go from here as far as our understanding of how this process will go forward afterwards. So just definitely appreciative of you taking up this item today. It's something that we've been working on for quite some time. As we mentioned, the deadline has been extended until the 8th. So Calaveras Public Utilities District, CCWD, and also Amador Water Agency and Jackson Valley Irrigation District are currently working on comments that will be submitted to the California Natural Resources Agency. And we plan to get those in by March 8th. We can share those with you ahead of time if that's something you're interested in. And just kind of, I'd like to just kind of briefly outline how we got to this point where this study came out. Essentially in 2014, there was a piece of legislation, SB 1199, that was going to create a wild and scenic designation of these various parts of the river. And the water agencies were sort of left on the offensive, or the defensive on that, and had to try to basically either amend the bill or try to kill it. So ultimately there was a compromise struck, and Assemblyman Bigelow carried AB 142, which allowed for the California Natural Resources Agency to essentially study the suitability of the river for designation and also take the input from the local agencies as a result of that and other stakeholders as well. Essentially, UMRA was required to put in sort of a cost share for part of that. And so the water agencies, including East Bay Mud and others, did put up some money for the study that ultimately came out of the Natural Resources Agency. And then also I just want to mention that CCWD and CPUD actually funded a joint study looking at the long-term water resources for Calaveras County. And we ultimately kind of mapped out where demands could be in the future and how those demands would be met, looked at various scenarios and planning, and that report was provided to GEI in the culmination of their report as well. So they did take that into consideration. And CCWD and CPUD retained ECOR to do that study. These folks are very talented. They understand sort of water policy and water planning. So that report is available. And also, we've been working with our Water Rights Council to develop a lot of that as well. So, so far, the districts have been pretty appreciative of the efforts by the California Natural Resources Agency and their outreach. We've actually met several times with the Natural Resources Agency one-on-one. They've been taking our feedback and input, especially on some of these special provisions that were mentioned earlier. It's been a very inclusive process. GEI is an expert, and they've actually done several of these evaluations, so this is not their first time doing one of these. And basically, the local water agencies between Amador and Calaveras have had their specialized water law council looking at Chapter 7, which are the recommendations, in addition to those special provisions. And we're kind of working towards that joint letter that we will submit on March 8th right now. So I just wanted to outline some of those special provisions, and I think we're kind of hopeful that mutually acceptable language will be agreed upon by all parties that can be submitted before March 8th. Specifically, we're looking at Provision 1, which provides assurances that existing water rights can be used to the fullest and extent, and that we don't have stranded assets. Provision 2 speaks to the future water rights and water reservations, including area of origin water rights, which there's still quite a few state filed rights that are available to Calaveras County. We ensure we want to meet our community's needs in the future. And then there's also other provisions. We're trying to include a language that would prohibit sort of a federal designation, which is separate from the state designation. And that would mean that the reach of wild and scenic could not be expanded to that quarter-mile reach reach is kind of was proposed before. So it's still 200 feet. So that's something that this board has to consider as far as land use designations. But we can believe that we can get that provision added so that it will be limited to that 200 feet. And so the agencies are sort of hopeful that the California Natural Resources Agency is going to take these comments and incorporate them into the final draft of the report. Right now, we're just looking at a draft report and just like to remind the board of that right now. So I can have Joel up here just to kind of summarize kind of where we go from here. I know I'm kind of running out of time, but I'm here if you have any other further questions as well. So.
Do we have questions from the board?
Yes. Peter, I know you've been at meetings I've been at, so these are kind of rhetorical questions, but I think they will help inform our discussion going forward. And most of them have to do with comments that were made. Having read the Wild and Scenic report, does the Wild and Scenic take away anybody's property rights or property?
That's something that we didn't really truly evaluate, but the answer is, well, it provides limitations on what you can do with some of the areas that are within the 200-foot zone of the river.
My understanding from the study is that Wild and Scenic is to the edge of the riparian corridor.
Yeah.
Not 200 feet. That's not a measurement, correct?
Yeah, so that is true, and also there's some language in there that sort of is specific to preserving scenic values, which is kind of, it's elusive, I guess, as far as how you would go about that, but that's partially one of the things that they consider.
So there's nothing concrete that takes away anybody's property rights. Roaring Camp, for example, on the Amador side, they're not losing their ability to run their business, correct?
That is my understanding, and they have mentioned that in the past.
Next question is, tell me about the two counties working together. I was at the UMRA meeting where I witnessed Jackson Irrigation District, Jackson Valley Irrigation District, Amador Water Agency, CPUD, and CCWD pass a resolution along with, through UMRA, encouraging the process, thinking that things are going in a positive direction, and with, quote, achieve broad stakeholder support and conclude with the inclusion in the Wild and Scenic River system was passed with all those water agencies voting with that. Tell me about the coordination between our counties and our water agencies.
So we've been basically working with the other agencies for basically about a year, just kind of on providing input into the Natural Resources Agency's process. And also, since the draft report has been released, we've been coordinating on developing comments that would provide the necessary assurances for the water districts that they could continue to be able to develop their water supplies as needed.
But from the content of the study as it currently stands with the provisions that are adding in, none of the water agencies that actually own the water rights are opposed to this.
Well,
recognizing it's a draft study.
Right. Yeah.
We're not talking about a piece of legislation, it's a study.
Yeah, so I can't speak for my board or for other boards, but as far as this goes, as far as it being an inclusive process and supportive of that process, yes, I think our boards have been supportive.
Is anybody's water rights being taken away by Wild and Scenic for the agencies that are represented in Amador and Calaveras County?
No.
See here, the Wild and study, there was a comment made about fire retardant by the supervisor from Tuolumne County brought forward here. The study specifically says that Wild and Scenic does not impact fire repression and that it's simply false. Is that your reading of it? Actually, you don't even have to read it. It's written in black and white.
It's in the report, yes. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. I'll have further questions later.
Any other supervisor? Supervisor Oliveira.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's not the first time I've heard that fire retardant is prohibited to be actually dispensed on a Wild and Scenic designated. And I believe that information came from a previous board discussion regarding Wild and Scenic. Also mentioned, if I recall correctly, that we would not allow the use of the waters of the Wild and Scenic designation to fight forest fires. Do you know anything about the accuracy of those statements? Are those true statements or are they modified?
So my understanding is that, yes, in an emergency, there still is an opportunity to, you know.
I'm going to have to ask you to speak up.
Sorry, if a helicopter needs to drop in and grab some water,
Right.
that yes, they can do so where it's needed. You know, wild and scenic is specific, again, to scenic and the free-flowing characteristics of the river. So most of the evaluations in the future are going to have just an added layer, making sure that future projects are not going to impact the scenic nature or the free-flowing character, which is something that the districts are also trying to get a little better understanding of how that would be defined.
So in essence, should there come a new project on the McCallamy River, if it's designated wild and scenic, we would have a CEQA issue, we would have possibly a NEPA issue if it's in a national forest, and now we would have a wild and scenic issue. Is that correct? If this designation goes through.
Yes, I think that's probably an appropriate statement. You know, and just we understand that any diversions on these stretches that are proposed to be designated, there are going to be any sort of new diversions or new dams are going to be precluded for those reaches, those 5 reaches. Also, I want to mention that CCWD and CPUD only evaluated reaches D and E in the report because those were the only reaches that the districts could actually potentially impact in the future. So some of the other reaches are on the North Fork of the McCallamy, and those were mostly evaluated by the folks on the Amador side of things. So.
Okay, so CCWD's area of research is very limited as far as the entire designation. I understand it's 37 miles, is that correct? Yeah. 37 miles of the McCallamy River, and most of that being in Calvert County, correct?
Yes, we focus mostly on the Middle Fork and the South and Licking Fork, so the river in our evaluation.
Now, I understand Assemblyman Bigelow is authored 142, Senate Bill 142, and there's certain provisions that must be met in order for him to continue support for this bill. Is that correct?
I am not aware of that as far as the prior legislation. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe could Mr. Metzger?
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, if Mr. Metzger could speak.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the board. My name is Joel Metzger. I'm the Manager of External Affairs for CCWD, and I wanted to bring the legislative perspective, which is the next step in this process once the draft report from the Natural Resources Agency becomes a final report, at which time I do hope we'll have the opportunity to have this discussion again with this board when we know what the final language is. To your point, Supervisor Oliveira, Assemblymember Bigelow did author 142, and that's what led to the study that we're now evaluating today. For him to continue with further legislation, Mr. Bigelow would like to see broad-based support from both Amador and Calaveras counties among boards of supervisors, water agencies, and community stakeholders. He'd like to see language that's agreed upon if he's going to throw his hat back in the political ring and continue with legislation, and that's not a sure thing. If there is great divisiveness and disagreement among the leaders of these two counties, we may see a different assembly or Senate member bring the wild and scenic legislation forth. And our concern, to be quite frank with you, is if wild and scenic is going to move forward, we would like to make sure that this county is protected and that our future is protected, specifically our water rights. The special provisions that are currently in the draft go a long way toward protecting those water rights, and they wouldn't have been there without Peter's work and our consultants and our lawyers' work to get those studies done and to inform this study. However, there's more work to be done on these special provisions before our staff would feel comfortable recommending a support position for a wild and scenic legislation that includes these special provisions. That's what we're working with other stakeholders. That's what UMRA is looking to have done. That's what they're supporting. These are sitting down, looking at language, working it out, making sure that we're protected, but other stakeholders also have a voice and have language that they can live with. If we can reach an agreement and we can send comment letters to the Natural Resource Agency that show that we have actually worked together and agreed upon language, there's a really good chance that that language would make it into the final report. If that language makes it into the final report, that's a really good foundation for legislation. You can take that final report and you can use that as the basis for your actual legislative language. However, if we don't reach agreement and that language doesn't make it in, we may see different opinions in this county from the Board of Supervisors and water agencies, and you may see Bigelow not pick up this legislation. You may see someone else carry the legislation. We may have less of an ability to make sure that this county is protected. In fact, we may see a lot of this language stripped out of the bill completely. And in that case, it would be very hard for our staff to recommend to our board to support Wild and Scenic, because our number one goal is to make sure that we protect the future of our kids and our grandkids and everyone who comes after us. And in our opinion, making sure that we have rights to the water that is reserved for us, in our case, 27,000 acre feet on the McCollum River system, in Amador County's case, 20,000 acre feet of water is reserved. We want to make sure we always have access to that. We are confident that if the provisions that we've developed go through, that water will be protected and our access to that water will be protected. And that's what our staff would bring forth to our board with a recommendation if we're able to reach that agreement. So what are we asking from this board? We want to make sure that you have all the information and that you understand that this is a complex issue, that this is a heavy political lift, and that this is not necessarily an ideal situation, but that we do believe that there's a path forward that will protect the county's future. I know that our general manager, Dave Egerton, wanted to be here today, but he's actually on the East Coast right now. And he did want to make sure that this board knew that we want to make you part of the committees that are looking at this language. We want to invite your staff to be part of these discussions to make sure that land use issues are properly analyzed, and that any other concerns that this board may have about this language is made part of this joint comment letter that we're looking to put together. And so I do hope that you'll take us up on that and be part of the process between now and the 8th when the comments are due, because really this study is an absolute key foundational component to the following legislative effort.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other comments, board comments? Supervisor Mills?
Joel, what did it cost CCWD for their portion of the study?
Roughly $60,000.
And so was that divided amongst the four? In other words, it'd be $240,000 total?
I don't know the exact number that it cost. I do know that there were multiple agencies that put forth money to help fund the studies of different portions of the river.
So the ratepayers who are, in essence, the most vulnerable here are the ones that are paying to prove the case?
Yes.
And not the ones who are trying to, in essence, put this designation in to have to prove their case. They've not put a dollar into it.
I do know that through the study, we felt it very important to make sure that we did an exhaustive look at our future needs, and that was an important investment to make. But yeah, I don't know what folks with other opinions, how much money they've spent on this. I do not know.
Do you feel that the recent Byron Bethany decision might have a longer range impact on some of these wild and scenic decisions going forward?
I don't know if I want to comment on what I think of that decision. I want to spend some more time looking at it. But in terms of senior water rights and the protection of those, I think that is one of our main priorities as a district that holds the water rights in this county for the most part. And we certainly want to do everything we can to protect our ability to utilize those rights and not lose them.
So the water rights we're speaking of from CCWD or CPUD are some of the most senior water rights in California on that river?
Certainly some of what we have are the most senior, and certainly CPUD has some of the very most senior water rights, especially in Shad's Reservoir.
So they're pre-1888?
Pre-1914. I don't know the exact date, but they're definitely pre-1914.
Okay. That's all I have for now.
Supervisor Clapp, anything? I have a couple questions, Joel, maybe you can answer. It's 37 miles. Are there current structures on the river in that 37-mile area?
The reason they broke up the different sections into segments is basically hopping over PG&E facilities. PG&E has an extensive hydropower structure on this stretch of the McCollum. And so, yes, there are facilities that PG&E has throughout the stretches. We do not have current facilities on the North Fork. We do have facilities on tributaries to the Middle Fork, and CPUD has on-stream dams on the Middle and South Fork as well.
My question is, and it was brought up earlier, a lot of the questions I have written here are brought up, but the CEQA was brought up, and this designation would put further restrictions on what's already in place with CEQA. So my question is, has anybody addressed, with that in mind and these restrictions, performing maintenance on any of those structures and what you'd have to go through, further restrictions to do any maintenance on those?
Within Special Provision 1, we speak specifically to existing infrastructure. That includes PG&E's infrastructure and AWA and CCWD and CPUD's infrastructure. There would not be any additional requirements on existing infrastructure through the Wild and Scenic designation, to my knowledge.
So, okay, all right.
Unless they were to be changed to where there would be more water taken or something of that nature.
Well, that kind of segues into my next comment here about, we are talking about a study. We're not talking about legislation. Right. And as we all know, when it gets to the legislation and it goes through the House or goes to the Senate, all of that could be out the window. It could all be changed.
You are correct.
Yes. What goes in generally doesn't come out the same. Everybody wants to throw their thoughts into it as it goes through. So whether we have agreements or not going in with Bigelow, if he goes forward, it doesn't mean that that's going to be what's coming out. It could all go out the window. And again, the comments I had with you last night was, it seems like this is a continuing thing. It's not going to go away. No matter if it goes through this time, it's going to keep coming up, because it has so far over the last course of the last 5-7 years. So, but I do have those concerns about it. This is a study, and we're open for our comments, but it doesn't mean anything until it gets through legislation what the final bill is going to be that they're voting on. So,
yeah. And if I may, Mr. Chair, when I think about what our strongest position is to protect the water rights and protect the land use and ensure the future of this county, our strongest position is for us to unify behind a set of provisions that do protect us. And if a legislator sees that both Amador and Calaveras County boards of supervisors, water agencies, and other stakeholder groups are all on the same page and have signed a letter to the same extent, same language, that's a really strong position to go into the legislative process with. And I'm thinking about me before a committee down in Sacramento saying, we're all on the same page. This is our home. This is our river. And we believe that these special provisions need to be included to protect our kids' future. I think that would be a heavy political lift for someone to take that and throw it out the window completely. But if we are not on the same page and if we're not in agreement, then I think that we are divided, and that makes it a lot easier for someone to say, well, they don't even know what they want, so why do we need to listen to them at all? Maybe we're just going to go ahead and strip all this language out, and we're just going to go with a straight wild and scenic bill. That would be my concern.
okay, thank you. Supervisor Mills?
A question, Joel, is this going to impact any potential raising of Lower Bear?
No, the wild and scenic is downstream of Lower Bear. However, I do believe that we would need to, or we wouldn't be part of that, but there would need to be an evaluation of whether that would impact this section.
Okay.
It would not be prohibited because it would not be within the section.
However, if you affect the free flow or affect the flow rate downstream of that location, it could fall into that under CEQA.
There's a potential.
Right.
Any other questions? Thank you, Joel.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
I'm being asked to take a break. We'll take a 5-minute break. All right, we're back. we have any other board comments? We have a discussion on it. Do we have any comments on whether we would like to comment on this study?
Well, my position is they always seem to be wanting something from us and never paying us for it. I talked to Tim months ago about it. Is like East Bay Mud, they have 1.1 million customers, and they want us to preserve their water quality and stuff. Why don't they just chip in, 50 cents a billing cycle per customer? I mean, pay us for something they're taking from us. And I don't think that's asking too much. South Africa right now is ran out of water, and I just can't see not developing what we have.
Supervisor
Look at me
Mills.
like I'm supposed to talk next. Which that's
Well,
fine.
this item is if we want to comment on the study, so.
Well, again, I've got to go back to, in my history, to when some of these people sitting in the audience weren't even born. When there was a wild and scenic effort on the Stanislaus. And I want to take you back in a moment in time, back in 1978, 79, and 80, when had that been declared a wild and scenic and New Maloney's would not have been allowed to be filled, what would have happened to the towns of Oakdale, Riverbank, Manteca, and Tracy in the wet years? The billions of dollars in damage that has been saved because we were capable of adding an impoundment. Now, on top of that, to CCWD, you never would have built the North Fork project. Would have been impossible because you would not have had a McKay's reservoir. You would never have been able to raise Lower Spicer or raise Spicer. And on top of that, there's what, $500 million worth of hard projects sitting there that is of benefit, economic benefit to our county as a result. I don't take wild and scenic lightly. I see it as an impact made by people who fought with or against me and my groups on the wild and scenic on the Stanislaus are now fighting the same fight here on the McCullough. Same people. And what is their ultimate goal? And I started to look at their websites. It's not simply to say prohibiting construction of any water impoundment facility, but if they can remove facility, they'll do it. In fact, they have primers on how to go about doing that. And on top of that, if you're talking about, let's say, for instance, the McCullough has further needs, because remember, California has increased in population since the time of the New Maloney's Reservoir 43%, and yet we've only added 3% more water storage facilities in that same period of time. We're expected by 2025 to have 11 more million people in California. We're all going to be drinking from the same glass, and that's going to be a very finite glass as we go down the road. So I really do appreciate the effort that CCWD and SSGID and Amador County and CPUD has put into this. But the goal of those that want this AB 142, they want free flowing at all costs. That's really what this is coming down to. I'm familiar with Project 137. And 137 really spoke to one thing, enhanced whitewater recreation. Included a toll-free phone number so you could know when the water was flowing on what weekend. Even if it didn't benefit PG&E to generate power at that time, they had to release the water so the whitewater rafters could recreate. So I want to speak to another thing, and that has to do with specifically federal and to some degree state sensitive use areas. For someone to tell me that we didn't treat firefighting differently in sensitive use areas has never been a firefighter. I'm not assuming what I know. It's what I was trained and what I was told. And that is when you're in, I'll give you an example. Anybody remember the fires of Yellowstone in the 70s and 80s? Or 70s? It was late 70s. We were told we could not move our tires off the roadway or the vehicle would be impounded. In fact, it took a presidential order to tell them to put the darn fire out. And the firefighters that were there were given those soft mats that we sleep on to lay across the meadow because The federal government did not want people leaving their footprints in the meadow to go put out the fire. Now, things have changed since then, I agree. But if Carl Rotifer says there was a problem with the Clavey and how we fought that fire, remember, I was on the 87 complex. And when we got into the Yellowstone, or the Yosemite Valley, or the Yosemite boundary, our firefighting tactics changed, ladies and gentlemen. It changed. We could not use retardant anymore. In some cases, we couldn't even use water. And so U.S. Forest Service, as you know, they don't carry a lot of water. They use leather gloves, and they just squish out the embers with their fingers in many cases. So sensitive uses is something that I think we need to consider here, and that in the future, it may impact our ability to fight fires. I have a grave concern, Joel, that this will get back to the legislature, and with a supermajority, they'll basically throw it all out. They'll strip it all out. I support the provisions that the study has, that you folks have done. I truly support them. But if they're not there, I'm not there either. I think the work that CCWD has done here is admirable. And I think you've gone above and beyond to prove your case. I wish that those people who wanted wild and scenic had spent an equal amount of time and money to prove their case. They haven't. So I think it's a noble cause. I will tell you this, I was one of the founding members of the Foothill Conservancy. Does that shock you a little bit? But I found out that when it's a noble cause to buy property to conserve land for public use in the future. I understand that. But when you're using an agency like that and getting involved in the use of a legislative hammer to get done what you want to do, it's no longer a noble cause. And I'm not even in it at all. So my recommendation would be to support CCWD and the efforts of the water agencies and their ability to put these provisions in, but only if those provisions remain. Should the provisions go away, we're going to end up with what they wanted in the first place. And then the fight will be on as to whether or not we can retain our pre-1914 rights and the ability to access the river. And thank you for your time and effort, gentlemen. So it's a fight that we had to do.
Any other comments?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'm going to reserve comments until I've heard from the other members of the board.
Supervisor Garamendi.
Thank you. I think, it's rare that you find an opportunity to hear this many unsupported facts being thrown around. I'm going by what the resource agency says regarding fighting fires. They oversee CAL FIRE. They say you don't change fighting fires in this watershed. I know the McCallum River extraordinarily well. With the only exception of a couple miles, I've hiked every mile of it, including down through the Delta. We should have no illusions that eventually that this needs to be this needs to be about protecting the economy and the environment and the water rights of this county. This act, in many ways, adds to that extra protection. It adds an extra layer. It throws lumber in the road for when the big guys from down in the valley or Southern California come after our water. These provisions explicitly give our water agencies their rights. Granted, there could be big lawyers that could come in and overrun us anytime, but this gives us a little bit of protection. It also prevents future dams on that river, which I think is a very good idea. I would never support damming any more dams on the McCallum River. It does not impact the impoundments that PG&E uses or any of our local water rights. As Joel and Peter put forward, they have looked at our study of what our needs are going to be. And they've said, okay, that's good. We'll keep that in there. We're not going to take away any water. But when they come for the water, it's going to come in the form of a dam. And they will take what they want unless we find a way to throw lumber in their road and stop them. And don't think that dams aren't on the agenda. Every 10 years or so, someone comes up with a new plan, either raising Pardee, going off the Devil's Nose, coming up, flooding Middle Bar Bridge. This comes regularly. And when you lose a river, you do not ever get it back. So, and when we lose that river, we will lose the water that goes with it as well. So this is an effort, in my opinion, we need to think of this as how we're going to protect our water rights. And as I think CCWD wisely put forward, to paraphrase, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And right now we're at the table. We're talking. We're putting forward these provisions. We want to lock this in. And I think we really need to do that. I'm just going to skip over a lot of the issues here about water and economic development and environmental causes, because that's a whole nother issue. So let's think of this in terms of how we're going to protect our water rights, how we're going to protect our county. And it doesn't seem to me like we're going to have a whole lot of consensus, because we're not talking about something specific. We're talking about a study. And so either, in my opinion, we need to either support the process as it goes forward or stay silent. Because if we step away from the table, we're going to be on the menu. Thank you.
Supervisor Oliveira? No comments. Do you have no comments? My comments are, I'm in agreement with Supervisor Mills. I would support CCWDs in their efforts to preserve our rights and the future rights of our relatives or people in Calaveras County going forward. I do have some concerns, though, and that's about what Supervisor Mills was talking about. When it gets to legislation and what it looks like when it gets there. If these provisions are not in it, then I would not support it. And then the other concerns I have, and I think we had a conversation last night about any verbiage, and I'm not sure the verbiage that you were talking about, saying that any future legislators or future governors could not allow it to go federal, at a federal level. I'm not sure you can do that in any legislation or anything that they can put forward. My concerns are, once it gets to state level and it's agreed upon and it's designated as a wild and scenic state level, how much longer would it go before the feds step in and say we wanted to put our designation on it also? And then that changes the whole ball game. It completely changes everything, as you and I had a conversation about last night. That's what I have a problem with, is not only what the final bill looks like that's going to be at legislation for them to vote on and for the governor to sign, but after that, at any time. It may not be a year later, it may be 5 years later, 10 years, but you just think at some point the federal government has the ability to come in and doesn't put their own designation on it because it's already that way from the state. And again, we would have absolutely no control over it at that point. The other item that we did talk about a little bit here about the 200 foot. I did go over it and look at it, and from the study itself, it says special treatment area of 200 feet doesn't take rights away, but potentially requires changes in timber harvesting practices within that zone. And that's to allow them to not just go in and clear cut it all the way. You have to be, it's a very tough process to go through and even down any trees. I'm guessing whether they're alive or dead or whatever.
That's today.
Yeah, even today without that, but still the requirement that's in there, it's written in there for a reason, to be above what requirements are today. Otherwise it wouldn't be in there. So those are my comments on it. So where are we now? Are we looking at a board to give staff direction to give our comments? I hear two comments that, at least through Supervisor Mills and myself, that say at least the comments would be in line with CCWD's comments and their proposed language in any bill going forward that actually protects our rights and not taking anything away from us.
Now, Mr. Chair, I do have a comment now after listening to my fellow board supervisors hearing their concerns and being part of a decision with a prior board regarding the same issue. I would support CCWD's position in this, and I would agree with some of the comments made by Supervisor Mills and would agree with some of the comments made by Supervisor Garamendi, and I understand their positions. But I'm not as trustworthy of the legislature doing what they're supposed to do. I would have to really be convinced that's going to happen. I understand this is a study, and we have till March 8th to take a position, if you will. But I want to see what's going to happen. And I want to make sure that this decision is the right decision, because the decision that was made twice before wasn't. So I would support CCWD, but aware of the concerns that Supervisor Garamendi has, and aware of the concerns of Supervisor Mills and Supervisor Tofinelli and Supervisor Clapp. I think we need to wait and see what happens on this, and we don't have a lot of time.
Supervisor Garamendi.
Mr. Chair, I do not think that, we're not the water experts. Our water agencies are. I looked at the UMRA motion that they made, and I would like to propose a variation of that that's a little bit more broad. Might check the box that we've taken a look at this, we're thinking about it, but we don't have to come to a firm yay or nay because we're not talking about a specific piece of legislation. It's tough to say we give comments to a study. So I would propose that we say something to the extent of Calaveras Board of Supervisors supports the efforts of the California Natural Resources Agency and the AB 142 study. We encourage the agency to continue to work with stakeholders to finalize the special provisions in the study to achieve the broad stakeholder support that will conclude with the inclusion of the McCalamy River in the Wild and Scenic River System. It's almost exactly what UMRA and the water agencies from both sides of the river agreed to just a few days ago. It's benign, it doesn't commit us to anything, but it encouraged them to continue to work with our agencies.
Did I hear any comments on that?
I will stand by what I had said in that supporting the water agencies in their study and the provisions that are contained. I would be willing to support those, but without them, there is no support for AB 142.
And I'll have to agree with that.
Well, 142 is already passed, so we're not supporting it. We're not supporting it.
The comments that CCWD made and have through their study with provisions into any legislation being worked into that is what we're looking at supporting. So do you agree to that? Do we have an agreement on that? Should we have a motion? Do I hear a motion?
What is I'll make a motion. Let me see if I can modify this. How about if we say Calaveras Board of Supervisors supports the efforts of the California Natural Resources Agency and the AB 142 study. We encourage the agency to continue to work with stakeholders to finalize the special provisions in the study to achieve broad stakeholder support that will conclude with the inclusion of the McCalamy River Wild and Scenic River System. The inclusion of provisions, of special provisions, are essential for ongoing support to the study. I don't know, something like that. Is that where we're going? Unless somebody wants to try to state it different. I'm assuming we want to keep talking and stay at the table, but we're not going to support any legislation.
The comment period ends on March 8th for this study. And I assume that study, once the comment period ends, that it's going to be taken in and all the comments gone over and all the, in consideration. My concern through all of those comments, and I haven't seen all of those comments, I don't know what those comments are. I don't know what's going to be picked and clawed out and thrown in and thrown out or whatever to be presented and formed into a bill to be presented for legislation. my concerns are, again, in having conversations. You're right, I'm not a water expert, but I do believe that you don't know what's going to come out of legislation in the end. And I do believe if we stand strong with our water agency here and the provisions they're looking to protect our water rights and all the other things that go with that, that we need to get that in that comment and show that we're unified. If it doesn't happen, then there's going to be problems where this water is coming from, the source of it. So that's where I'm at. Supervisor Mills, your light's on.
I can't support the motion.
Supervisor Clapp, any comments? So we had a motion, we don't have a second. Do I hear another motion?
Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we the board, do support the efforts of the water agencies as they go forward to meet the obligations of AB 142 in the study, and that should those provisions that they are bringing forward fail to materialize, that our support will no longer be there for whatever decisions made.
I would second that.
For discussion.
For discussion.
We don't know specifically what the language in those provisions are. We have a broad idea. In the presentation, in the study there were 3. In the presentation at UMRA there were 4. I understand there could be as many as 7. So supporting a provision that we don't know what it says, specifically supporting a provision we don't know what it says, is that a good idea? Yeah, 6 of them. So there's 2 that aren't even written down in this thing. So we're supporting something that we don't know what it says. Is that a good idea, or should we keep it broad, general provisions?
Well,
before we put down an ultimatum.
I'm looking at Mr. Metzger, and you can come to the microphone if you'd like, sir, but those 6 provisions were presented to camera. Am I correct, or did I miss something?
There are 6 provisions that the water agencies have put forth in draft form. We're working with other stakeholders to refine that language, and those have not been submitted formally to the Natural Resources Agency at this point, because that will go in the form of a comment letter once we've finished refining them. We're trying to find broad-based support for this language from all parties, and that's, again, our strongest position. So we are not going to submit any kind of a comment letter unless it contains provisions that we're comfortable with and that we would come back and recommend to you could be comfortable with. But we're still working on those. So it may be 6, or maybe it will be refined down to 4 or 5. It just depends on what the final negotiations yield.
The ultimate goal, though, should be to support the efforts that all of 4 agencies have done as they continue to ensure the best possible language and the best possible provisions for everybody that's in this decision process. And we, as a board, should do what we can to support you in that. And that failing to give you that support is what I'm most concerned about. So that's why my motion says to support the 4 agencies and what they're doing.
Yeah, certainly, that would be a big help to show that you support us in our efforts, and then we will bring what we finally negotiate back to this board, and you'll see it in our comment letter, and we can discuss it at a later date, and then we'll see what makes it into the final study, and all of that is yet to be determined. We do not know what the final study will say. That's up to the Natural Resources Agency. The best we can do is build a coalition while the comment period is still open, and then put forth a unified comment letter. That's the best chance of getting these provisions into the final study.
Do I need to modify my motion then that you will come back, the agencies will come back before this board for further discussion and further support prior to?
We're happy to come back and provide an update to this board if that would be helpful.
I think it would be.
We would also invite staff to join the process if this board would be interested in that, to be part of the actual negotiations, to make sure that the county land use concerns are addressed as well, and have a seat at that table.
the comment period ends on March 8th. We don't have another meeting until March 13th.
Yeah, it's too late.
So it's going to be too late to bring back for our comments after that, because it'll already be over with. So
My motion stands then, Chair.
your motion stands, your second stands. So I have a motion and second on the floor. Is there any other comments, discussion?
Guys, I'm glad we're keeping it on the issue of water rights, because I have sat up here for 14 months listening to everybody talk about how we've got to protect the watershed, and it's our most valuable thing, and yet, it's okay, we're not there today. We'll have that discussion another day. Could you please restate your motion, Mr. Mills? So I can understand it?
That we would support the efforts of the water agencies and their provisions, and that if those provisions are not included in the final decision with AB 142, that our support would then go away.
Supervisor Clapp, your second.
Yes.
All right, any further discussion? If not, I'll call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Passes 4-1. Moving on, item number 15. Madam Clerk.
Item 15 is from Human Resources to adopt a resolution approving modifications to the Sheriff's Management Unit MOU for January 1, 2018 to June 30th, 2019.
Good afternoon, Honorable Board. Judy Hawkins, Human Resources and Risk Director. And what I'm bringing before you today is the Sheriff's Management Unit and County. We've come to an agreement on modifications to the SMU MOU with a term to expire on June 30th, 2019. What I've handed out to you today is we came to a last-minute change on the MOU. This is on section 4.01. This does not change any of the bargained items. The only change is they wanted the listing of the increases in a different order than what was originally put in the MOU. And so it does not change any of the items bargained. It does not change any of the benefits. And so the modifications in which were agreed on is a 5% equity increase for the position of captain and a 2.5% equity increase for the position of lieutenant, which will be effective on March 3rd, 2018. We have a 2% COLA with a 1% PERS pickup by the employee with an effective date of July 7th, and then an additional 5% equity increase for the position of captain, which is effective September 29th, 2018. So the financial impacts of these changes will be $62,238.07 to the general fund. For fiscal year 2017-18, the impact will be $12,588.
Thank you. Any board comments, questions?
On page 8, you also have some additional red-lined items.
These were all the changes to the MOU. The only difference was section 4.01. That's the only difference from what was originally in the posted agenda.
Any other questions? Any public comments? Captain Ballard, any comments?
I do want to thank the SMU bargaining team. They were very good to work with, which included Captain Ballard.
Captain, we're going to be at your place for lunch.
Yeah. Okay. Cell number 14 for him.
Well, I don't want to say anything that Captain Ballard might disagree with, but the taxpayers say the same thing over and over again. We like to pay our employees the amount of money that's needed to attract and retain qualified people. We don't want to pay more than that, and also we don't want to pay less, because when we pay less, we'll take an indirect loss by increased turnover and excessive training costs and probably a lessening of performance and public safety. So that said, the questions I have: has there been a study done with these recommendations, or prior to the negotiated settlement, of comparable salaries in other jurisdictions similar to us? And if not, we'd recommend doing that before approving it. If it's been done, then we probably need to have sunshine about that. Also, when talking about increasing a salary 5%, 10%, or whatever, it's a good idea to stay what the salary is that you're increasing, whatever increase you're doing. That way, the taxpayers and the public get a better picture of the amount of money we're paying these people through this negotiated process. Does that make sense? Thank you.
Any other public comments? Okay.
When we started negotiations in March of 2017, we included the Sheriff's Management Unit in our equity study. And the captains were within the 15 to 20% out. And so that's why the captains were included. With the equity increases for sergeant, the sergeants were now bumping against the lieutenants. And so we had to make an adjustment to the lieutenants, or else our sergeants would be making more than our lieutenants.
Okay. Any other board discussion? Questions? Yes?
Any other questions from the board?
No. All right, I'm looking for a motion.
I'll move the item.
I have a motion by Supervisor Clapp.
I'll second, Mr. Chair.
Second by Supervisor Oliveira. Call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 4-0. Lunch at your house, Ed? 5-0, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
5-0, correction. Now we head to the big one here for the day. You want 5 minutes to set up. The CAO wants 5 minutes, so take a poll.
3, no.
3, I hear 3. Do I hear 2?
Come on, let's go.
Okay, we'll take a 5 minutes. All right, we're back. Madam Clerk, item number 16. I understand it's a 15-minute item.
Item 16 is from the Administrative Office to receive the fiscal year 2017-18 mid-year report, to approve the mid-year budget adjustments included in attachments A, B, C, and D, requires a 4/5 vote, approve the updated fiscal year 2017-18 designated and special revenue fund appropriations and revenue included in attachment E, requires a 4/5 vote, approve the purchase of certain capital assets included in adjustment F, approve the acceptance by Victim Witness Assistance of a new grant award from Cal OES in the amount of $112,982 and related budget adjustments as reflected in attachment C, requires a 4/5 vote.
Mr. Lutz, your presentation.
Well, 15 minutes, I mean, I was going to go on for 3 hours for my presentation. Joking, of course. I will try and be concise and brief as possible for my presentation, which will, for the most part, mirror what was already outlined and discussed within the budget memo. But what I'd like to do is hit on a couple key points and then tee up a discussion if the board would like to go through, basically concluding by talking about the recommendations, if the board wants to walk through each of the recommendations outlined in the attachments or the requests, and then also have a discussion about some general direction and guidance going into the new fiscal year budget. So with that, again, I'll start off. I want to talk about summary of expenditures as of December 31st, 2017, which would be the mid-year point, and then summary of revenues as of December 31st, 2017. Unless I note otherwise, everything here is in the framework of that 6 months. There were 1 or 2 exceptions because of the fluid nature of whatever the particular item is that I felt I can acknowledge where we're at mid-year, but I also wanted to talk about current information as possible to help in the board's decision. Mid-year summary and next fiscal year planning, and then, of course, discussion and consideration and acknowledgements. So moving along, this is a summary snapshot for the general fund, and again, looking mostly here at the general fund for the analysis. You can see the amended budget. Now, amended means that, through the year we took a couple of budget adjustments following the final budget adoption. What I tried to do is pull in what that amended or current budget is, and then also comparing it to our actuals. What that then gives us is the percentage of whichever one of those categories that we're spending. You can see salaries and benefits. We've, based on how we budgeted, we've spent roughly 42.7% of what we budgeted. Services and supplies at 48.1%. And then other charges at 46.5%. Capital asset purchases, 46.8%. Operating transfers out at about 23%, and then contingencies. Right now, it's showing 0. When we move into next fiscal year, I might want to work with the auditor to show a better way to track contingencies. And my case in point in, I believe, November, the board actually moved money out of contingency. So we actually did move some contingency, although what's showing in budget is that $1.3 million, because what the board authorizes is basically transferring money from contingencies to the budget that needed the shore up. It's a fine process, but it also misses the fact that we did have to use some contingency funds earlier in the fiscal year. And then reimbursements for services and supplies, tracking about 31.2%. So overall, for our total expenditures within the general fund, based on how we budgeted, we're tracking at mid-year at about 43.8%, which is tracking pretty good at this point. Means that we do have budgetary savings, which is definitely helping on the long term for our fund balance projections. I wanted to show this because it's one thing you see the dollar amounts on these areas and how large those ones are, but I'm a big fan of the pie chart because it can really give you a pretty good summary of just how much salaries and benefits, 48%, services and supplies, 45%. When we're really drilling down and looking at a lot of our expenditures, those are the 2 big areas we're looking at because they, by and far, have the biggest impact on our general fund expenditures. So drilling down, again, salaries and benefits are largest general fund expenditures, then the services and supplies. I would note on services and supplies at $11.8 million at that 48.1% spent versus budget. It's still, in my opinion, tracking okay, and it's not a huge concern. And the reason I say that is 5.38 million of that is related to disaster recovery, which really accounts for about 45.5% of those expenditures. If I were to factor those spending out, we'd be more on track and in line with how we were last fiscal year. What ultimately happened, because we had large activity with the tree removal that was occurring toward the third and fourth quarters of last fiscal year, the 16-17 fiscal year, those invoices rolled into the first and second quarters for this year. So we are recognizing a lot of those expenditures at this point. So when we look at our salaries, we're running approximately $2.18 million in salary savings on the general fund, which again is certainly helping for our cash position. We know historically we seem to have a pretty strong vacancy rate. When we look at where we were at mid-year, we were about 26 positions in the general fund that were not filled. That doesn't include the non-general fund departments, which had another about 28 positions. So within the general fund, though, those 26 positions that are, throughout the departments, although again, quite a few deputy sheriff positions, correctional officer positions that are very heavily general funded positions where we had salary savings in. Additionally, overtime costs running about 43.6% of budget. Although again, I know overtime costs is something we look closely at. My feeling is, overall it's looking better. We're down about 18.9% over last fiscal year at mid-year, which I think is hopefully a trend of trying to fill more positions, retain those positions, incur fewer overtime liabilities. So then moving on to summary of the revenues, again, similar table breaking out where our revenue collection actually has been versus what we budgeted. You can see the biggest ones on there. A lot of the federal and state comes from the disaster recovery that we might be getting through the federal and state government. That's going to comprise a good chunk of those monies. They're also lower because we're still working on getting those invoices in, and we haven't incurred as many expenditures in that area. So I expected those to be low, just based on I think 2 weeks ago, we received one of the larger invoices from Tetra Tech, which was for the Ganda expenses. That's a large chunk of that contract. We're reviewing it now. We'll be submitting for that. So those are those types of things where we expect a lower amount percentage-wise there. On the tax side, which is your primary general fund piece that funds general operations, you have your taxes, which includes property taxes, sales taxes, transient occupancy taxes. I purposely pulled out the excise tax on that line just because I didn't want it to muddy up the general taxes picture when we're trying to look at both as independent. So you can see our tax collections are coming in about 56.8% of what we budgeted, so higher than budget at this point, and I'll talk a little more about that in a minute. Also, on the excise tax at mid-year, we were at 4.57, which where we budgeted. When we budgeted the excise tax, we budgeted just what we had received at that point with the first installment and assumed no additional revenue collection with the second installment. So that's where you see what we budgeted as the most conservative bet, what we knew, and then reflecting what we actually received at mid-year. Then the licenses, permits, and franchise fees, that line about 40%, 40.9%. We were lagging behind on our PG&E franchise fee, and part of it is we've been going back and forth with them because they were wanting to amend which parts of their infrastructure is over our land, and we asked them to validate some of that data. So I think that's just temporarily held up getting those franchise payments, but I expect those to be coming in the next couple months. Fines, forfeitures, and penalties at about 57% of estimated revenue. And then other big ones, obviously operating transfers in down here. That's where you're seeing operating transfers in from designated funds for certain departments. So for instance, Sheriff AB 443, AB 109, all of those types of designated funds where the department's bringing in revenue through their transfers. It's not unusual to see it low like that at mid-year because typically we're still looking at what the expenditures are going to be and making sure that we're bringing in the correct amount within those programs. That's where you see a big uptick when you get to third quarter and particularly fourth quarter as close comes in to bridge that gap on the department's needs. So as I mentioned, at the general fund, we're about 43.7% of revenue collection for all funds, so taking into account Health and Human Services, Public Works, other areas, we're at about 42.59% of budgeted revenue. And overall, it's looking strong and tracking along with the expenditures, and also consistent with historical collection cycles. The bulk of our collections occur in the last fiscal year. And I'll tee up when I'm looking at analyzing revenue, I'm really trying to look at where we are in the historical revenue collection cycle, what are the leading indicators, what are they showing, and then what changes have occurred that might modify our assumptions. One of the pieces that I think is really a helpful graph, if nothing else, just to kind of show you where the collections are at, is this is a revenue collection cycle over the last 2.5 fiscal years. The black lines indicate the midpoint, or December 31st mid-year cash or revenue collection. And as you can see from where our historical is, where it meets over here, we're tracking high on what our collection is. But you can also see typically, it's like the iceberg. You have a small slice on this side and then a really large amount of revenue collection on those last 2 quarters of the year. That's when you're bringing in your designated fund transfers. That's when you're getting some of your summertime sales tax that comes in from tourists, the transient occupancy tax. So we feel like we're tracking pretty well relative to other years, doing a good job at collecting some of that upfront revenue where we can. The areas that, of course, we still could improve on is timely, quick invoicing on some of the disaster grants, which we're working on. I also, and this is not in the report, but I thought looking at some of the leading indicators, it was worth mentioning. Looking at our commercial property, new permits, this is these numbers, 13, 14, 14, 15, 15, 16, 16, 17 are showing full fiscal years. So this is showing just halfway through the fiscal year. what I think that's important is if the trend continues, there does seem to be, and certainly a noticeable from the last few fiscal years, an uptick in new commercial construction permits, which of course has the potential good impact on sales tax, jobs, and other things that drive housing.
Those are full years?
Those are full years, yeah. This is just half year. And then again, for the additions to buildings at 59, again, seeming to track as a general growth trend. We continue to watch those closely as a leading indicator of what we might be seeing. Also, residential property new permits. I will note that housing seems to be trending a little down, although I'm not certain that's necessarily unusual because of Butte fire recovery. I think when you're looking at, these are new residential permits, your largest one in 16-17. Well, 16 was when you would be having a lot more permits, 17 from recovery from the fire, whereas now we're down to about 50 halfway through the year. If you go back 2 years, you could start to see we were on a slower growth curve. It shot up, which I would probably say is an anomaly, again, based on probably the number of new residential permits that had to be taken out. When you look at additions to residences, those do seem to be trending a little low. Manufactured homes seem to be trending about where we would expect. So we're continuing to watch the residential housing. Again, my hope is if we start to see more commercial, will drive more demand for housing. Which then factors into, obviously, property taxes on housing. Approximately 48% of our collected revenue comes from those property taxes. Sales and use taxes, approximately 46.5% of our collected revenue. Of the sales and use taxes, 72.5% is from Measure C revenue, and then 27.3% from sales and use taxes. Looking at our sales tax, this is kind of an average trending for when we receive the bulk of our sales tax throughout the year. You can see it ebbs and flows, again, based on when we have more tourists coming in the area. It also is going to be impacted by the season. Hopefully, with all this snow, we'll see more people coming up wanting to ski, which will then start to drive up our good sales tax numbers. What I think is important, though, is sales taxes were tracking at 1.718 on December 31st. Typically around December, we've collected about 53% of the sales tax that we'll get. If the sales tax number holds, the trend continues, we'd expect around $490,000 additional over budget sales tax receipts should the general model hold. Again, these are assumptions, but it's based on where we seem to be trending. Additional benefits beyond the general fund is that it does take some of the pressure off of our subvented departments. It's a funding source for 2011 realignment, 91 realignment, and Proposition 172, which would provide needed growth funds for Health and Human Services, probation, the sheriff, and the district attorney. So sales tax is one that, although in the general fund scheme of things is a little smaller because it's so strong as a funding source in a lot of our subvented departments, I look closely at where we're going on those trends because it has huge impacts on what the general fund needs to put out. Other revenues, again, transient occupancy tax, tracking at 60% of budget at $362,000, which was good news and a kind of about what we expected. We budgeted conservative when we entered into the agreement with Airbnb to be collecting TOT directly, through Airbnb on on those properties that are renting them out. So we expected a bump, but without knowing what it was going to look like, we continued to budget conservatively. And lastly, excise tax or Measure C. As I mentioned before, we budgeted only the remainder of the first installment, which was $2.15 million. As of February 26th, and this is the one spot where I say rather than look at the December 31st number, I wanted to get the remainder of what we felt was the second installment payments. As of February 26th, it was at $7.697 million. My report was a little different because we had collected more from the time that my report was written by about $90,000. So at this point, we're about $5.54 million over budget, or over collected, I should say, on the Measure C excise taxes. A note on disaster recovery and expenditure revenue or reimbursement. It's still coming in. We're about 52% collected for what we were expecting, rolling in for this year. About $2.7 million is outstanding right now, and we're continuing to work closely with Cal OES and FEMA. I will say, in general, we seem to be getting the funds. These are tied to Butte fire recovery, which was not part of FEMA's initial guidance on extensive delays in reimbursement. The winter storms will be a different issue, at least the last indication we had, although we're watching closely with the new 2-year spending bill, that it did provide quite an augmentation to federal disaster relief. So the hope is that we'll start to get money flowing.
Okay. Mr. Lutz, could I interrupt you for a quick second?
Sure.
On this particular item, this 52% collected from disaster, does that include our $6 million plus road repairs from FEMA on the Butte fire?
Road repairs, no.
Okay.
That includes nothing for road repairs because we haven't done any work for road repairs.
Okay.
And that's part of the problem, which brings me to my next point. It's important to note that, one, the way, as we've talked about in the past, the way FEMA operates is we submit projects and get the approval on these projects. Now, we're nearing the appropriation limit of our current set of approved plans. We're working diligently to get new requests submitted and updated, particularly with the contractor Quincy, and that heavily will impact roads. Getting those updated and submitted is absolutely essential. If not, our options then end up putting pressure on the general fund to float the expenses, potentially for a much longer period of time.
Just for clarity, we're talking storm damage is one separate entity and Butte fire is another separate entity for our roads, right?
Yeah, we are talking both. We have some approvals on the winter storms, but in terms of Butte fire roads, that's what we have not gotten any revenue for, and we're running out of the appropriation amount.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
So now moving on, the mid-year summary. Key areas that have impacted the mid-year position at this point, as noted, unanticipated revenues in excess of $6 million. And then also working, the county administrative office, working differently with some of the larger departments, trying to identify ways that we could spot internal savings, and under the guise that my office is more than willing to work with departments, provide support to then bring back to the board adjustments to help those departments basically work within their means. And a prime example, if you have salary savings or you have contract savings, but you need a capital project, let's target those as your one-time funds for this year, bring it to the board as that request. The important thing is it's not to penalize departments. It's not to go into next year and say, oh, you didn't need it. So therefore, we're going to cut it, as much as let's work to make sure that we're maximizing what dollars we're putting on the table and not coming back creating new problems, draining contingency when we don't necessarily need it. I will particularly call out, I appreciate the Sheriff's Department for really working closely with my office to identify areas that they have savings in their budget, that we could get some key projects done this year using existing general fund dollars that were allocated to them without having to also draw down their designated funds. So I, again, want to really thank the Sheriff's Department for those efforts. We also did have general budgetary savings, as I noted before, and overall a limited draw against general fund contingencies. What that's done is put us in a position where we're estimating a cash carry for the end of the fiscal year of approximately $9 million. In context, I think we went in this year, our initial estimate was 1.5, and then we went to about 3. So it puts us in a better position to then start to look at, from the board's perspective, what are the policy priorities that the board wants to look at? How do we want to manage going into next year? And with that, I would say considerations on the cannabis enforcement program. As outlined in the memo, it's the recommendation that the board consider funding the enforcement program for the next fiscal year. At this point, we're estimating that cost to be around $1.4 million, with about $850,000 of that being sheriff personnel, another $400,000 for services and supplies. And while I want to qualify that services and supplies, it's not a bunch of equipment per se. A lot of that is in contracted services for those coming in doing eradications on site. When we're working with limited numbers of staff and you want to be fast and responsive, it's a blend of sheriff staff, then building code personnel, and then the abatement contracts to come in and actually cut down plants, haul them for us. And then last, $150,000 for building code personnel. Again, another critical component with the enforcement program is making sure that we're providing resources and support to building and code enforcement.
Mr. Lutz, I have a question regarding Captain. Could I have you approach the podium, please?
Captain Jim Macedo, Sheriff's Office.
Captain Macedo, do you agree with these numbers as far as your cannabis enforcement going throughout this fiscal year?
Well, this appears to be a projection, more or less, for costs relating to next fiscal year. What I can tell you is they're relatively close. If the ban continues, it is intent for our intent with the Sheriff's Department to come before the board with a plan moving forward, a comprehensive team-based plan and involving code enforcement and environmental health. I did notice environmental health is missing from there, and I think they're going to have to be part of the team moving forward. But I would, I would say, excluding any major unanticipated issues, that this is very much generally in the ballpark of what we're going to need.
Using these numbers, Captain, are you going to lose any bodies?
No, but I would just ask that the board keep in mind that if we do have to lose one, it could trigger our extra hire staff to leave. So the way the county is set up, extra hire personnel, part-time personnel has to leave before any full-time. So there could be a trickle-down effect should somebody have to leave. So in a sense right now, no.
And we have 4 in the academy now, or 5?
Correct. Separate from this program. Those are patrol-related folks.
4 or 5?
4.
4?
Yes.
And Hopefully, on the completion of their academy training, they'll revert into the field training program and their positions are secured.
Correct.
Just want to make sure we're aware of that. Thank you, sir.
Don't walk away.
Yeah.
We're looking at these numbers as though they're an expense. And I said back in January 31st of 2017 that this needs to be a cost recovery, that we need to treat this like an enterprise fund, that whatever it costs you to take it out is what they have to pay us to do it. Whether we get a full cost recovery is another matter, but that's for a different time and place on this board to discuss. But I don't see these in my world as being expenses. I see these as how do we get these to an enterprise fund? How do we get these to a true cost recovery from your side so that you can then build your workforce to do more? So, just a comment.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Captain.
Thank you, Jim.
Any other questions on that? No, that's okay. Those are good questions. Additional considerations that were noted in the budget memo, and just as we're going into this next fiscal year and looking at some of the cost constraints, negotiated salary and benefit increases. When going through the bargaining process, we had estimated about $1.53 million to the general fund for those increases. We're working diligently to get our position forecasting together. In fact, I was going to kind of close with a little bit of what we're doing now. So we should have exact numbers shortly, but that's where we're feeling we're generally at this point.
Does that include unfilled positions? The increases to unfilled?
Judy, that's actually a really good question on how we were calculating that.
When I was calculating these out, this is general, because we generally run about 65 vacant positions we have for the back to 2008. And so when I was calculating these out, it was filled positions.
It was filled positions?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Pension liabilities, as I mentioned, on March 27th, we'll be bringing a proposal to the board to consider entering into agreement with PARS to set up a 115 pre-funding account. Although by no means will it solve our pension liability problems, it speaks to some of the broader discussion points that we're really trying to manage what is an issue across the state, and that is the sheer number of unfunded pension liabilities in counties and cities that are really have limited control from the PERS standpoint.
And that brings up a conversation that I'd had with you and including Kristen, because hers is a very large department that's not in general fund. And the general fund, non-general fund employees truly being non-general fund employees when it comes to pension. Because we are picking up the difference, the general fund is picking up the difference, and we need to address that going forward. How it's going to be non-general fund employees in whole. So we need to have those discussions.
And I think there's a gap that's created as a result of that. But if we could look at our PERS liability going forward and start to get some true trajectories through 2022 and seeing what it is, I think we'd be in a better position to try to understand it and deal with it.
Agreed, and PERS continues to throw monkey wrenches into the wheels, because with their change of amortization schedule, it again is going to cause us to go back and have to recalculate what our estimates are, and it's probably going to make the projections worse.
Yeah, the Gatsby 75. The point is, Angels Camp is looking at getting out of PERS completely, but the point is, when you do, your existing retirees, you're going to have to backfill their loss as well. And so that getting out is really not an option here for us. I don't want us to think that we could ever afford to do that. But we do need to start finding ways to deal with that trajectory.
There is some momentum, which I think is promising. I think the good news is of something as large as this is you have so many counties that are impacted by this that there is greater push on a legislative solution, including, because this is something that the pension, as the two board members on it know, the ad hoc committee had discussed is, well, can we start to change our benefit formulas or benefits overall, or have our new employees that we hire on not be in PERS? Some options that start to look at how do we start to address the future, whereas in the past that wasn't possible. There are some preliminary measures that are starting to get floated through the legislature that might provide some traction.
Well, that's promising.
Next, of course, government center maintenance, space planning. As also mentioned, April 10th is when that plan's coming to the board, and discussion about our deferred maintenance projects, but then also to most notably the district attorney's office and how to, what the best option for that department. And then just trying to look at what's underutilized, maximize space utilization. And so that'll be coming forward to the board for consideration. And then continuing to look at the cost pressures in HHSA, primarily with IHSS at this point, based on changes a couple years ago to the MOE. We know that that's going to continue, the sunset continues to unwind, and that's going to be a cost back to HHSA that at some point it's being forced to reduce services, or the county provide additional general fund to support the IHSS MOE. So those are all what I will call the big dollar amount considerations that we're looking at going into the next fiscal year. And then those in mind also sets the framework of obviously wanting to limit growth and projects in other spots at this point, because we do have some very large key liabilities on the horizon that we need to address. So what I was planning to do then is wrap up this part of the presentation, allow the board to go through the attachments if they would like to go through either one by one, or if they want to select certain ones that were included in the agenda item. I'd be happy to provide information or do that discussion in the interest of wanting to provide what the board would like to see. I can go either way, and I'm kind of looking to the chair or other board members if you have a preference on how you'd like to address the item.
Chair, I'd like to have 5 minutes, please.
You'd like to have 5 minutes? We need to take a 5-minute break. We are on. Mr. Lutz.
All right, so in conclusion, what the administrative office is asking of the board for mid-year action items is to receive the fiscal year 2017-18 mid-year report, approve the mid-year budget adjustments included in attachments A, B, C, and D, which requires a 4/5 vote. I would also add, and the board and public has a copy of an addendum 1 that was something that we missed on the district attorney that we did go ahead and add, that does request a transfer from contingency. So that is included in addendum 1. Approve the updated fiscal year 2017-18 designated special revenue fund appropriations and revenue included in attachment E, also requiring a 4/5 vote. Approve the purchase of certain capital assets included in the adjustment. And I should say, I noticed it says adjustment F, I was correcting to, it should have said attachment F. And then approve the acceptance by Victim Witness Assistance of a new grant award from Cal OES in the amount of $112,982, and related budget adjustments as reflected in Attachment C, also requiring 4/5 vote.
Any board comments? Supervisor Mills, your light is on.
I would say that the number of mid-year adjustments that are here, based on our size of budget, great job for everybody. I think they went over and above. I've seen a whole lot worse. And to see it in this kind of detail and to know it's as minor as it is, it speaks a lot to how well your office and how well the rest of the staff is working to keep this in alignment. And I sincerely appreciate it. So, the other thing I wanted to ask about is, are there any departments that we're loaning money out of the general fund to kind of backfill or keep them in a, and maybe the question is, if so, how much?
In general, anywhere you have grants, you are going to loan, there's going to be a gap between when you get payment on the grant and when you get receipts of the grant funds and actually incur the expense. That being said, the transit program, as we discussed at, I believe, last board meeting, is at this point, the general fund loan is in excess of about $500,000. Where I had asked if Mr. Krovitz might pop up, but he did not. The issue being able to get a successful invoice passed, that conforms with what the budget is adopted. Mid-year was supposed to be making those adjustments. A call that I had to step out on says that there might still be a discrepancy from what was supposed to be in the mid-year documents and what transit is showing, which my concern is if this creates further delays. Once I'm done with this, I'll be sitting down to try and figure out what the challenger issue is. So to answer your question, it does occur, as a general practice, but usually with a view of fairly quick revenue turnaround. The exceptions obviously being disaster recovery, which we know just by the unique circumstances, and then the transit program.
I certainly don't want to go into the end of the year having to loan $1 million to transit to offset their account so that we can get it transferred over to the JPA. That would be very difficult to swallow. So I trust everybody's going to get together and work on getting this issue corrected so we don't continue to float now $500,000 plus month over month over month when it's a very simple fix for those that are involved.
Any other board comments? No? If not, I'll open it for public comment. Any public comment? Any staff comment?
Thank you, sir. I have some really dumb questions, but I want to find out. When you go back to page 5 and it's talking mid-year summary, and it says estimated cash carry $9 million. What is cash carry? Is that money left over? Is that money extra, unspoken for? What's cash carry?
So in general, cash carry is when you budget, particularly when you have a large budget. Obviously, you plan for the worst in the case of maximum expenditures and least amount of revenue. When unexpected things happen, like you get additional revenue that you didn't budget for, or expenses don't occur as you would have expected, the general fund carries what is kind of an account balance. So when a good example would be a checking account. We have a general fund reserve account that's like a savings account, but then our general fund can be looked at like a checking account where you have X dollars in it, you're writing checks throughout the year, you're getting payments, but at the end of the year, what your balance is in that account becomes a fund balance. What we then do, basically leftover money that was not used in this fiscal year. What we then do is carry that over into the next budget year, which is then rebudgeted to be used in operations for the next fiscal year.
And is that something that happens every year? There's a cash carry that is carried over from one year to the, is this something that usually happens?
It is. It's a very common practice. Most of the funds have a cash carry. If you don't have a cash carry, that means you're literally operating very close to, you know,
bankrupt,
to having to pull in some of like your general fund, your savings account to make up for your operations.
Now I noticed it said mid-year, so that's up until June. I mean, up until January.
Up until
Okay.
December 31st.
So then when we get down to the June time, is there still a cash carry at that point?
This is the projection for
this is
June.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then I'm pulling this and moving it over to the cost pressures in IHSS. And is that something that would affect this cash carry if what we're anticipating with IHSS happens and you guys get the bulk of the responsibility?
Yeah, you can go ahead.
The cash carry on that IHSS piece, it wouldn't impact this year's cash carry. That's more of a point for next fiscal year. That looking at as we enter into budget development and the board is looking at policy for how those general funds need to be allocated. Those are considerations for them.
Okay, and at the halftime, you know, in January it was 9 million. What do we?
Okay.
What do we anticipate?
One last question. That's it.
Okay. What do we anticipate for at the end of the year? It says 9 million here. What would we anticipate would be the amount in June?
That is what we anticipate in June.
This is,
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I allowed that because he took up some of your time lengthy trying to, instead of waiting until you had all your questions and then answering. So.
I'm glad you were fair to Bonnie. Al Segala Taxpayer Association. Looks like we have some main things are happening. One, we don't have the emergence that we had before, and the other thing is we have some changes in policy regarding cannabis. Now, as I understand it, we passed a ban ordinance that'll go in effect within the next few months, I think, unless it's changed. And so that has financial effect on the county. I understand we've collected money from the registration process, some of which is a tax and some of which is registration fees. So I understand that the fees we collected need to be returned if they're not allowed to be registered anymore. But the tax that we collected, we get to keep. Also, the money that was set aside for cannabis suppression would dry up because there's nobody to tax. You killed them. So my question is, what effect does this budget have, considering the changes brought about cannabis, assume that the ban goes through? Is that an easy question? No? In other words, do we have money because of the cash carry and because of the lesser expenditures that we have mid-year to be able to be okay financially or not?
I'll let the CAO answer.
So I think I got the pieces that you were asking, because at first you start off with the cannabis registration fee. I want to make it clear that that is not included in the cash carry projection.
Okay.
That obviously any remaining funds within that account would need to be returned.
Okay.
So that does not factor that at all. When we talked about the enforcement piece, those were general fund dollars, or in this case, we were, tagging it to what was the Measure C monies that would be helping to fund those eradication efforts. In terms of what effect the program has, what we've been working very diligently to do is look at ways where, as Judy Hodkins mentioned in a prior item, we typically run between 60 and 70 vacant positions in the county. A number of those that are anticipated to be filled but just aren't. Right. Working to try and identify ways to move any staff that could be potentially laid off or impacted into those funded positions. The goal is not to be in any layoff situation. If anything, we do have some extra hire positions that are linked to cannabis, and we also have limited term positions, but neither of those have vested job rights.
I see. Okay, so basically, we're okay financially.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other public comments?
Is there any projection on the asset forfeiture in this budget? Is there any, I know with the cannabis, I know it's cannabis, but if I grow cannabis and I get busted and you take my home and you take my assets, is that included at all in a projection for this money coming?
Okay, can you ask, is that the only question you have?
Yes, that's it.
Okay, that's the only question then.
That's it.
You want to answer that?
No, and that's I'm looking back to Captain Macedo. That's a really sticky wicket that I didn't, we weren't even putting any projections in at this point. Maybe if you want to illuminate the issue a little more.
I'll be brief because I know it's late. No, that is not, that was not anticipated or projected or built into this budget. There is a civil court proceeding that has to occur as it relates to asset seizure and asset forfeiture. We do not know at what point in time those civil proceedings will become complete. Once we have an anticipated arrival of the money, then we would certainly place those into a designated fund, specifically titled for asset forfeiture and seizure, because those funds are restricted. I can tell you we have seized assets over this last fiscal year, but with no guarantee that the civil court proceeding would be directly brought back into our favor, that it would be kind of very risky to project and build your budget based upon that. But we are seizing property, cash, and assets, and we hopefully will have a beneficial result as we proceed with each individual case.
Captain, is there any reason why you had your hand on your gun while you were speaking here?
Force of bad habit.
Okay. Any other public comments? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board. Board comments, questions, deliberations, motions?
Chair, is staff wanting us to do these individually?
I would think it would be best to tackle them individually, yes. We'll call for a motion for each one, discussion on each one.
Do you want to clarify, is it? Okay. Yeah, as I say, is your preference that it be one item?
Would you preference that we do it all at one, do all 5 items in the motion?
Well,
unless we single one out, I guess we can do it, unless we want to single one particular one out, we can take a motion for all 5 items.
the point is the way the agenda is written, all 5 items are in that single agenda item.
Well, they are.
But if somebody wants to,
If somebody wants to pull one out, then we can do it that way. If you want to pull 2 out, 3 out, or whatever.
Okay.
Because you want to make adjustments on it. But if we're in agreement to all 5 in the way they're written. Mr. Alvera, your light's on?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I notice we have a number of department heads here, and I'm wondering, is there any comments from any individual representing our departments that we haven't heard that would like to be heard? Okay.
Good afternoon, Kathy Howell, Victim Services. I was I was noticing the 112,982 number that's up on the board. In actual, we have a budget that has been approved, or a approved number amount of 180,943. That number is actually from our performance period beginning October 1st, 2017, and it goes until September 30th, 2018. So I believe that the projected number of 112,982 is actually for the 3 quarters. I'm hoping that we won't have to come in front of the board again in order to have the full amount of 180,943 approved.
You are correct that it was factoring for the fiscal year. Obviously, you'd be rebudgeting whatever that remainder piece is for that last part of the performance period.
Okay, so will we need to come back in order to have the...
That'll be built into your new year budget submission.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any other staff? No?
I'm satisfied, Mr. Chair.
Satisfied? Okay, well, your light was on, fine.
No, I'm just...
Supervisor Garamendi, do you have questions, comments?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion.
All right.
Make a motion that we accept and approve items 1 through 5 on the mid-year budget.
I have a motion by Supervisor Garamendi. Do you have a second?
Second.
Second by,
Sorry.
second by Supervisor Mills. Is there any other discussion on this? See, now I'll call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 5-0. Is that good, Madam Clerk?
And if I could just say, I wanted to acknowledge, again, the board, county administrative office staff, the auditor, human resources, and the department heads. It was, changing processes has been, it's always a challenge, and everybody responded really well, asked to do forecasts that in the past they hadn't been pulling together, but the forecasts are a helpful process to start to look at how departments project outward. I also, want to acknowledge and thank the board in December when they approved the purchase of OpenGov, because you might have noticed some of the, particularly in the report, some different look of some of the graphs. We have been in a test environment with OpenGov, and because we had validated the data and knew that it was good, I was able to utilize some of the features within OpenGov to look at reports and run information in real time, really quickly, and compare multiple fiscal years, break it down by departments. Once we go live, I'll be bringing back a presentation to the board to showcase the system, and then start to also roll it out so that board members can go in and get real-time information on how expenditures are looking. It's a wonderful tool, and I really appreciate the board taking the risk on another system implementation, where I think ultimately this will be a very successful implementation, and I'm looking forward to it.
Supervisor Garamendi.
Oh, I was just getting ready for the next part of the conversation. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
But what's next?
I see Rebecca, our auditor, just stepped in the room. I had some conversations with her yesterday. Rebecca, can you step up? And I think it's important to go over a couple things. Can you tell us the balance of the teeter funds as of today? I'm sorry if
I know.
But you tell me
well,
yesterday
because we're in the process of making additional transfers, so I think it's. Do you know out off the top of your head? I think it's about 7.
6.8.
Yeah, it's close to 7.
6.8, but you're making transfers in.
We're making transfers out.
Out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is the, if you recall, regardless of anything, there is an annual fixed allocation into the general fund from Teeter, and that I thought we changed it last year for the 500,000.
Yeah, the 500,000, which was processed, I think, on Friday, or at least going through
It's
on
in
Friday.
the, yeah,
So it's not reflected, and that went into contingencies.
No, it went into general operations.
General
It's what we do every year for
Okay.
budgeting.
So and that's not reflected here because it just happened.
Yeah.
Right.
Correct, yeah.
And-
And in our conversation yesterday, this is the first year in a number of years that you have not had to go into teeter funds to pay the bills. We've come out of general funds to do so. So I think that's very
Yes,
good. That's a good thing.
yeah, so I mean, just kind of following up, it's been hard listening over there because it kind of cuts in and cuts out. But just to kind of follow up what Tim was saying, we do have a substantial cash carry. We're looking at a substantial fund balance that we'll be carrying over. And I think what that offers us is some breathing room in order to talk about what we're going to do with the pension stabilization. I think it gives us the opportunity to have some discussions about some stable revenue that we can count on as a county that isn't based on any sort of volatility. Because right now we're dealing with a lot of volatile revenue, whether it's grants or cannabis or property valuations. It's sales tax, it's all just been very volatile. And every time we come to the board, we say, well, we're not entirely sure what's happening. We got to wait until, this one more thing gets through. So I think that this kind of gives us some breathing room, some time that we can sit here and collectively strategize about how we're going to move forward, how we're going to do things better. I'm really excited about I think that Tim and I just completely geeked out about the budget software because we could see things that we know from looking at our financial reports, but it was really hard to get others to be able to see that from a pictorial process. So that was really exciting. So I'm really excited for that budget software as well. I've been over in my office validating position allocation costs so we can get that included with the next budget. But I'm pleasantly surprised, and I feel like we have a little bit of a breather. So
Thank you.
And that will go live when?
Did you want to say something?
We are trying. It seems like we meet every 3 days. So we are going to try to get this at all possible. We're going to try to get this out to departments to actually start getting departments trained the week of the 12th. So I think it's March 14th.
I think March 14th is the day that we've designated for departments for training. As Rebecca said, we're meeting probably 2-3 times a week, sometimes with the OpenGov team, sometimes internally. And the progress has actually gone along faster than I would have expected, which has been nice. As Rebecca said, right now the biggest piece is getting the personnel numbers right. And her office was validating it, and then I had asked my office to start doing some spot checking to make sure that it was projecting the way that we would expect, because that's going to drive so much of what departments are doing.
So if there's some functionality in building of next year's budget, by the time you go live on next year's budget, everybody will be on board and rolling in real time with it, which will make it substantially easier because they've worked the numbers coming up to it.
Yes.
So
Can I
that's
interrupt
good
for a
timing.
second and suggest
Yeah,
that
we're
we
in an
reopen
agenda
the
item.
item because there was already a vote, and so all it takes is a motion and a vote to reopen the item for further discussion. Give everybody one more shot at public comment.
Okay, so do we want to reopen for conversations?
I make a motion to reopen for conversation.
I would second it.
We have a motion second, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that's satisfied? No. 4-1, sorry.
Two.
4-2,
3-2.
3-2.
I'm sorry, can you please clarify? Supervisor Garamendi made the motion, and who made the second? Thank you.
And I took the vote, it was 3-4 and
3-2.
yes. Supervisor Mills, your light's on, are you done? Supervisor Garamendi?
No, I'm just continuing the conversation. I'm just trying to deal with the whole concept of Rebecca and Tim geeking out over the software.
I was going to say, it really was. Like, literally,
It's just a party you
emailing
don't
back
wanna
and
miss.
forth on the day that we were both digging into it and pulling information, and it was kind of a geek out fest.
You guys are a couple
Yeah.
wild, crazy folks. to tell you.
So as I understand it, we have new software?
We will, yes. We're we're in process of implementing.
Okay. At least I have a starting point now.
And it's real time, which means when it's up and running, it'll be like a dashboard. You can literally look at it in real
You're going to have to
time.
invite a dentist to the next party. Looks like it feels like you got left out.
Yeah, I'm feeling left out.
Okay, so we have any public comment on the Teeter Fund and Rebecca's statements? Anything at all? Mr. Segalia.
Al Segala, Taxpayer Association. There's one thing that wasn't mentioned, and probably it's proper that it wasn't, but I noticed my PG&E bill went up, and I'm thinking that maybe they're preparing for paying the county some money, and I wonder what is the scope of that money that's anticipated? I think that we've launched a lawsuit, which probably has a particular amount to it, and it'd be good to know what that amount is and what effect that would have on the budget. Thank you.
And at this point, because we're in pending litigation, we really aren't able to discuss what's been put on the table. We have a confidentiality statement. None of those monies are factored into this budget, though.
Supervisor Garamendi.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to take on some of these considerations that CAO Lutz put into our memo today, because I think that, some of them, when we talk about cannabis enforcement, and I think we could all see, we had a $7.5 million hole last year. We collected this revenue. We've done well in containing our expenses. Our revenue from sales tax is going up, which puts us in a good position. Property taxes.
A lot of things are going.
Yeah, things are going in the right direction for us, but we also have to talk about, this faucet is going to turn off for a big chunk of this money. But I want to talk about, I know you need to do some planning, Mr. Lutz, on what we're going to do next year for our budget, because we have people whose jobs are at stake here. And, it would seem to me that, and I would seek counsel of this board, that we can afford to implement the entire cannabis program again. Not the planning, not the putting forward the applications, but certainly the code enforcement, which does have a very important role, since most of this is civil. The sheriff's department, because there are bad guys running up there. And we have, when we look at the budget and you say we got 1.5 million in increased salary costs that go into this roughly. And then we got roughly 1.5 million in cost to continue the cannabis program to ensure the safety of our citizens over the summer and fall. And we're looking at $9 million. We're at 6. So we get close to having enough to cover our structural shortfall, as we guess it will be, and maintain the safety and welfare of our citizens. And I wanted to see what the board thought about, can we continue this going forward and make sure that we provide the safety for our citizens? The irony of it is we're going to do it with cannabis taxes, but at the same time, our priority needs to be keeping the program intact, the MET team, and code enforcement, and associated functions.
Supervisor Mills?
I think there was more positive than just a cannabis tax, but as I said before, I'd like to see us develop some type of an enterprise fund type of operation here for these enforcement activities. I think we took a good step with environmental health, of saying if you forget to get a permit or try to hide from getting a permit, it's going to cost you double now. That was a good step. And I think we need to go after people, and whatever it costs for us to be bringing them into alignment, that's what they're going to end up paying for. It isn't something that we should be looking at as an expense. It should be a zero-sum game. And I'd like to see it as a separate agenda item that we discuss how we're going to do that. And it might even require a nexus study of some type to be sure that our costs are equal. So,
if I could just make one thing. I understand what you're saying, Supervisor Mills, and certainly with things like code enforcement, we put these civil penalties, but law enforcement, in my opinion, is different. If we take a look at law enforcement as a revenue-generating activity, I think that betrays a lot of trust that citizens have. Everybody's always worried that CHP is not getting their quota of tickets. That is not the case, but it puts them in a bad position. So I think that we have to look at law enforcement as one pile of money where we have to enforce our laws. And we have to look at civil enforcement under code as a place where we could take on those. Are we getting our cost recovery? How are we going about the liens? But I think we have to keep them separate for several reasons. And I hope we can do that. But I think we should fund both. And I think that you're correct that there are other good things happening in there in the budget, but they don't equal the magnitude of where the cannabis dollars are. And we should also keep in mind, this puts us in good shape for 18-19. Now, no one likes to hear, what about 19-20? But it will come down the pipe eventually. And we have to figure out how we make up that delta in between.
And I like the idea. I mean, I really do, that we, somewhere between now and the beginning of the budget year, that this board does sit down and have those kind of policy discussions about how we want to tangle with this. So it's going to be an important issue. Otherwise, there will continue to be a drain on reserves as we don't truly recover in places we should be. So I think that Public Works is doing a great job in getting their Nexus study completed. I don't know when. I think not Public Works. I'm sorry, Building Department. I don't know exactly where they are in getting that completed, but you know that's all part of it. And you couple that with the Track It program that they're working, all of that will help to benefit us in the longer term. But I think we need to have that decision and policy made before we get into the actual budget for next year. So we have a clear understanding of what do we want to expend and what are we hoping to accomplish with expending it. So it isn't just the money; it's what are we trying to get done. I appreciate
agree,
that.
and I think we have to do that sooner than later. We have people whose jobs are hanging in the balance, and we actually have a very skilled workforce in this that is going to be in demand. So we want to retain our skills that we've spent blood, sweat, and tears earning over the last 2 years and keep them going. They know their stuff. And when I run into other supervisors in other counties, they go, oh, we can't wait to get those skills. So let's keep them here.
Supervisor Aldera.
Just one quick question for clarification. Mr. Chair, you stated that we were able to establish this budget without any contribution from the Teeter Fund, right?
No, the auditor hasn't been using, as she has in the past several years, Teeter funds to pay bills. She's been using the contingency, general fund contingencies to pay bills.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
To pay the bills as otherwise she would have been doing in the past year.
I was confused. I thought we used $3 million of tax Measure C money to balance the budget, and I'm kind of going, wow. Was I wrong on that or what?
No, she has not. Normally, in the past several years, she's had to dip into Teeter to pay for cash to pay fund.
That's all I had.
Yes, if you recall, over the last several years, all through the recession, we have had to use Teeter as a stopgap measure because our revenues were less than our expenditures.
Absolutely.
So we have kind of turned a temporary coin in that we are not having to rely on Teeter in order to be used as a stopgap.
Okay, thank you.
I have one more other item I'd hope we could take up as a board. We have some cash now. We've had, last fall we were worried that we didn't have the cash flow to start some of these major projects. Butte Fire Recovery Roads, some of these trees, we're going to get reimbursed, but we have to put the money forward. Now, I would hope that perhaps the CAO and the controller can figure out how much money do we need to have in what is in essence a revolving fund to get these construction projects going and then have them refilled by FEMA and OES going, or PG&E hopefully down the road. But we have to get the work started. And now that we've got, and we'll refill that bucket, but right now we need to get the work moving. And I'm sure there are other things like that too. This is an opportunity that we need to be very cautious about and wise with.
So your recommendation is that we start to think now about what kind of reserves that we want to hold back for a specific, and create those buffers now rather than deal with it when it hits us.
Right. If we give out that, if we start spending money now, we won't have that. So I would like to propose that we take a certain buffer, whatever that we feel we can. We set that aside because it's not just today. The way our cash flows go, they're always coming in weird. So this can kind of give us that fund that that enterprise, that we could get these projects going, hold that money aside. If things go south in 1920, that's still there. We can still go use it if we need to. 2020. Then we could deal with it then. But I want to have that discussion about what you guys said. So I have two things that I'm hoping we could bring back to the board. One, how we're going to maintain safety and security and continue the cannabis program. And then two, how we get these construction projects going without, and you need a little cash to make a little cash.
Exactly. I mean, I would love to get our district attorney out of the travel trailers, just as an idea, but that's just one of a larger scope of what we want to talk about. So I think we need to be very fiscally conservative and continue down that track.
I'll absolutely agree with that.
And I think that our CAO and the staff is doing a great job of lining up with that. So I don't see it as a real difficult lift, but as long as we show fiscal conservancy in what we do, I think that they will follow our lead.
I agree. So
that's it.
We could talk about it or bring it back, or I don't know what the process is, bring it back.
Let's bring it back. Let's agendize it, bring it back, and have these discussions. And it'll be beneficial to have these discussions before June when we go into our next year's budget. At least we have these conversations going forward, and it'll give you a better enlightenment when we go to the budget in June for next year.
Yeah, my thinking is March 27th is a possibility, but in some respects, April 10th might be better because that's also when we're going to have the space plan. And I say that's relevant because we do have a recommendation together for the district attorney, and I think it might provide a nexus within that discussion.
Is that tax day also?
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah. It kind of all fits in then.
I think that's a good idea.
Okay. Okay, April 10th. Okay. All right. Moving on, Madam Clerk, item number 17.
Item 17 is from Human Resources to adopt a resolution authorizing changes to the position control list for fiscal year 2017-18 mid-year budget adjustments effective March 3rd, 2018.
Judy Hawkins, Human Resources and Risk Director. So to go along with the budget that you have approved, I'm bringing to you the position control list. And so the positions that go along with the budget, we have in information technology, we are adding a business analyst 3 to manage and perform the duties associated with the implementation and maintenance of the new Track-It system. For public access TV, we currently have a part-time administrative assistant 1-2, and it was recently brought to our attention that this classification is insufficient for the duties that are being performed, so we're asking to make that position full-time. And then also in the review, we are reclassifying that position as a access programming coordinator. We are also doing a new job description for the station manager. In the Auditor Controller's Office, as we have been discussing, we are restructuring her accounting technicians, and we are creating the County Fiscal Assistants 1-2 series. And then we are also taking the accountant auditor positions and creating a 1-2 series with those positions. In the District Attorney's Office, as part of negotiations with CCPSEA, we are restructuring the deputy district attorneys and taking the 1-2 and making a 1-2-3-4 series, which is consistent with other counties. And then with changing that series, we will also have to adjust the deputy DA position to be in line. And for Health and Human Services, they have requested a reclassification to, since they identified a significant change in duty and responsibilities. So upon review of the request, it was found that the employee's duties have changed significantly, and the changes were found to be an essential part of the small department. And this was for the first 5, and we are reclassifying an account technician 4 to an administrative assistant 1-2. And so in behavioral health, it's been requested a reclassification of their supervising case manager to a clinician. And the agency director and deputy director have identified a need for specialized direct services involving integrated dual diagnosis treatment, IDDT, within the adult system of care. The employee in this reclassification holds a state licensure and has extensive knowledge in the IDDT program. This position will be responsible for the most intensive 10% of the CCBHS client population. It's critical that the agency have a skilled clinician in this program. In our library services, we have the Friends of the Library that was kind enough to fund a limited term library branch assistant 2 to perform typical duties assigned to this classification, fill in at all branches throughout the county as needed, and provide outreach programming for children 6 to 12 years of age, emphasizing science, technology, engineering, art, and math, also known as STREAM learning. This assignment is for a period of 1 year to commence on April 2018. In our probation department, we are adding a probation officer due to a new program, which is the pre-trial program. So Calaveras County's pretrial program will begin February 20th, 2018. This program will require the skill of a seasoned deputy probation officer. As such, they will be utilizing an experienced employee for this program and will require a new deputy probation officer. This position is not an option. We are required to add this. In our Public Works Department, as a condition of bargaining, we agreed to review our mechanics and create a series. Instead of having a mechanic and a lead mechanic, we now have a mechanic 1, 2, 3 series. And then we also are taking we have a lead mechanic position that has been underfilled for quite some time by a mechanic's helper, so we are permanently making that position a mechanic's helper. We are also taking, as part of that change in classification, we have a mechanic that works on the sheriff's automobiles, and so we will be creating a classification specific to the sheriff's mechanic. And we are also reclassifying the Marine Safety Officer and Marine Safety Sergeant specific titles to Deputy Sheriff 1-2 and Sheriff Sergeant. They no longer will have a Marine Safety tied to them. And then the Sheriff's Department has requested position 3507, Deputy Sheriff 1-2, be deleted due to the position being funded by the ADA JAG grant, and that has expired as of 12/31/2017, and this position has been vacant for some time. And as for financing for all these positions, you have they were part of the budget that you just approved.
Any questions, discussion? Supervisor Mills, your light was on first. You beat him to the punch.
I'll let you go.
Go ahead.
Well, I just really have a problem with the state telling us we have to fill a position, but they don't give you this. It's an unfunded mandate. I mean, good grief. At what point do they say it's all unfunded mandates?
Get used to them.
Got a long list.
Yeah, it's a long list. So I just want to go on record as objecting to the state deciding that we're forced to do an unfunded mandate again.
We are it is the hope of the probation department that in the future this will be a funded position.
Yeah, okay.
Ms. Hawkins, thank you very much. As usual, you are providing most excellent service to our county. One quick question. I understand it's all been budgeted. The restructuring of the departments you've mentioned before. Were we aware of this before we budgeted, or was this coming on, or is this something that has been brought recently within the last 60 days as far as restructuring? It's the first I've heard of these different departments restructuring.
The discussions have been going on for some time regarding the DA. Now, the mechanics series restructuring,
I understand that.
Discussion was
Excluding
going
that.
on before I even came
I
to
understand
the
that was part of the negotiations.
The DA restructuring, that discussion's been going on for several months now. So it's...
Is this the first time it's brought before the board?
Yes.
I recall it came up, I believe in September, after the final budget was passed. It then did come up through negotiations where CCPSEA was going to be asking for those positions to have equity increases. We instead felt that it would be better to look at it more holistically of, we know we needed, it's more than just the 1-2, we needed to identify a series within the district attorney's office. And similar with the auditor's office, there were some concerns raised by staff just on the flatness of the organization and differentiation of duties. We had a grievance that was filed that ultimately, rather than continue to pursue the grievance, we would go through the administrative process, review it, and then bring something to the board for consideration for the auditor's office.
We also did a full study on the deputy DA positions and compared them to what other counties, how other counties were structured, and also pay structure. And then we brought forward a structure that was in line with other counties.
And that information was used in forming our budget, correct?
Yeah.
Yes, yes. And the CAO was involved in all of the discussions.
Okay, thank you.
Any other board questions, comments? If not, I'll open it for public. Any public comments? No? The three of them are shaking their head no. Okay, we'll bring it back to the board. Looking for a motion.
So moved.
I have a motion by Supervisor Mills.
Second.
Second by Supervisor Garamendi. Call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Passes 5-0.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk.
Supervisor announcements. In compliance with AB 1234, chaptered as Government Code Section 53232.3D, board members shall provide brief reports on meetings they attended at the expense of the local agency at the next regular meeting of the legislative body. This report is required to include meetings attended for which there has been expense reimbursement, mileage, meals, lodging, etc., but may also, at the board member's discretion, include any other meeting attended by the supervisor on behalf of the county.
Let's start with Supervisor Clapp that is reading his paycheck, I guess.
I have nothing to report out on. I've been in bed the last 4 days.
Now he tells me. This end of the diocese is glad that you're down there. Supervisor Mills.
Yes, I would like to report on February 20th, the Angel City Council voted 4-1 to join us with the JPA. So it's a done deal, and now it just goes to COG for their final vote. Also, Calaveras County Legal Affairs Committee, I went to their meeting just to get updated on what's been going on there. One of the most disconcerting ones is AB 401 DOD, Low Income Water Rate Assistance Program. Think of a water tax. And they're going to have the water districts collect the tax and pay it to Sacramento. And that's only the beginning, so I just want you to be aware of it. Also, CCWD is asking for a position of support from Calaveras and Tuolumne counties on the WIN Act, that's the Water Watershed Infrastructure Improvements for the Nation Act that was signed by President Obama as his closing days in office. And they are in the process of completing their response, and it is required. It will allow storage at No Maloney's for CCWD. So it'll be something I'd like to see on the agenda, that we offer up some support. If you get a hold of Joel or Dave Edgerton on that, I think it'd be a big plus to have that in our agenda. That's all I have.
Supervisor Oliveira.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Real basically, I attended the CTE Career Fair at Bret Harte High School. What a great event. I mean, I think they had over 80 exhibitors there. Had high school students from Bret Harte and Calaveras. I understand that was a first. Some good workshops, some good presenters, very good program, very successful. Glad to be part of that with Paul DeBarlo and our school superintendents. Thank you.
Supervisor Garamendi.
Mr. Chair, I have no meetings I'm required to report.
Okay. And both of my meetings that I had scheduled for this week, yesterday and last week, were both canceled. So I have nothing to report. Staff, any comments? Diane? I do have one thing to bring up, though. I went to lunch today with Supervisor Clapp and walked in, and Karen Varney and Carol Gates were having lunch there, and ran into them, and I hadn't seen neither one of them for a long time. And it was very nice to see him and have a little conversation with him. I thought maybe you'd be, yeah. So they're doing well. They're both doing well. So, Karen Varney is a former county clerk, and Carol was the former board clerk. I don't want to say how long ago, but it's been a while ago, so we'll leave it at that.
I was here the day that Diane took over.
You what?
I was here the day that Diane took over.
Were you?
Yep, I said I'd always remember names because my sister's name's Diane.
With that, we are adjourned.